In 1977, a multidisciplinary group of women who were pioneers in understanding the centrality of menstrual cycle research to women's health held the first interdisciplinary research conference on the menstrual cycle at the University of Illinois at Chicago. Following this groundbreaking conference, the Society for Menstrual Cycle Research was formed and incorporated in 1979. In 2003, past and present Society for Menstrual Cycle Research presidents gathered at the 15th biennial meeting held in Pittsburgh to share their views on the Society's history and future. When and how did you get involved in the Society for Menstrual Cycle Research?
At the College of Nursing at the University of Illinois, where I was a faculty member, Harriet Worley was Associate Dean for Research. And there was another faculty member, Effie Graham. And so Harriet sat down with the two of us and said, how would we like to put together a state-of-the-art conference? The first conference was called the Menstrual Cycle. It felt very historic, that first conference. During the second conference, we talked about organizing a society. We felt as if the menstrual cycle was what brought us together, so we decided that the society should be called Society for Menstrual Cycle Research, partly because when we started in '77, you couldn't talk about menstruation on the radio or on TV. It was partly kind of breaking that taboo, I think.
I should have been minding my P's and Q's and writing the last couple of chapters of my dissertation. And one of my colleagues told me about this conference on the menstrual cycle. I attended it and found some of the most interesting dialogue and discussion. What I had heard presented at that conference were a series of papers that were focusing on clinical samples of women, that is, women who were coming for health care because they had serious health problems or mental health problems, and great generalizations were made from these very unusual groups of women about what all women experienced with respect to menstrual symptoms.
Right out of my PhD program, I was contacted by another woman scientist at Kimberly-Clark, and she was appalled at the way the industry was studying tampon absorbency. She was the one that actually told me about this Society for Menstrual Cycle Research. And I came, and that first conference was very much, I want to say, a dialogue, not necessarily a friendly dialogue, sort of a push-pull between very entrenched biomedical scientists versus some of the feminist scholars in women's studies. So we had two polarized groups talking at each other. My dissertation was on the mini pills, and we used a primate model and studied the menstrual cycles of monkeys, and we all cycled together. It was fascinating to see everybody cycling, including the female scientists.
Well, I was at the first Society for Menstrual Cycle Research meeting in Chicago in 1977. I had done some research as part of my doctoral dissertation, trying to unravel the mystery of premenstrual bloat. And somehow or other, Alice and Effie heard about it, and I got a call. So when Alice called, it was with great trepidation, if you can believe that I would have that feeling. I said yes, and then she asked me to moderate a panel. I just know that I was there with a group of people who were affecting change all over.
My mentor and advisor and chair of my dissertation committee is Diana Taylor. The society meeting was held in Montreal, and Diana Taylor was slated to present a paper there. However, she had a conflict, so I told her I would be willing to go to Montreal and read her paper for her. That was my first introduction to the Society for Menstrual Cycle Research.
I was in Boston at a conference of the Association for Women in Psychology. I was a graduate student. And I went into the coffee shop and sat down at the counter next to a very friendly woman. When I saw her name tag, I saw that it was Sharon Golub, and she said to me, "You must come to the Society for Menstrual Cycle Research," which I'd never heard of. So I went, and I had a great time. I just couldn't imagine being at a conference where every single session was of interest to me.
I first became aware of the Society through reading some of the really early classics. My first official meeting that I attended all the way through was in Salt Lake City, Utah, and I presented a paper there, and I was hooked. It was also the meeting where people who were the idols, in a sense, the stars, talked to me in the hallway. And as a new doctoral researcher, it was just thrilling for me to have people who were interested in the same work that I was interested in.
What memorable moments do you recall from the conference held during your presidency?
It was the first time that we broadened out to invite humanities folks. So there was a historian and writer. There was a presentation by a group of performance artists called The Empress Wears Red Clothes. What they were trying to do was to promote menstruation affirmation culture.
The most memorable conference story of either presidency occurred at the Seattle conference. The morning of the conference, I was informed by one of the women attending that she and other colleagues were there handing out leaflets about our keynote speaker and how he was going to be accused of a behavior that would be quite inappropriate given that this conference was largely dealing with a women's health issue. To our great relief, she declined to make a public pronouncement about it if we gave her the opportunity simply to hand out leaflets. For about 5 minutes, I wasn't quite sure that we would have that conference, or at least the keynote speech.
Ann Arbor was a great place to have the conference because it was on campus. One of the keynote speakers was Roger Haskett, who was involved actually in developing the diagnosis for premenstrual syndrome, and even within the psychiatric medical organization that was defining it and pushing to get it into the DSM-3 at the time. There was a lot of controversy. We also had a woman talk about the menstrual cycle in space, who had actually worked at NASA, because we didn't want those women astronauts up there having to worry about cycles.
We had the people from the Los Angeles Feminist Women's Health Clinic come. They were demonstrating menstrual extraction.
Nancy Mayers, and she wrote a book called Sex and the Gimpy Girl. She was a handicapped woman. Sex was a non-issue, supposed to be a non-issue to her. Well, it was not a non-issue to her. Her perspective was the healthcare provider thought she should not be having sex. After all, she was a handicapped woman. Many of the health problems at the border relate to access. Women on the U.S. side have better access, of course, than women on the Mexico side, but there's lots of movement across that border, and that becomes quite an issue for healthcare providers. And I remember at that time one of the hot issues in healthcare was the threat, particularly in California, that providers were going to have to be the screeners. In other words, providers were going to be the ones that were responsible for determining whether an individual was legal and therefore had access to healthcare dollars on the U.S. side.
One of the wonderful things from that conference was the bronze tampon. We were all so thrilled when we saw it. It was really a wonderful moment. She had a funny story about the guy who made it and how embarrassed he was with the task and so on. The other one was about Sarafem for PMDD. Sarafem is basically Prozac. Of course, it's not designed for people who have garden variety premenstrual symptoms. We thought that it was a dangerous thing.
So we've had some fabulous papers. This morning we had the work of 3 Pittsburgh researchers who looked at the issues around menopause as well as premature adrenarche. And one of the things that I heard from 2 different people was, oh, that explains my daughter. Dr. David Linton's papers, he presented 2 presentations as opposed to papers that really pulled out media clips. This presentation today was specifically called Pulling the Plug, and it was around Prince Charles and Camilla Parker Bowles. It was a wonderful addition to the component of the Society's research work that looks at where menstruation all fit within the context of our current societal views as well as our scientific views.
What controversies related to women's health occurred when you were president?
You know, hormones were a big issue at that time as well, hormone replacement therapy, because it had been demonstrated that taking estrogen increased the risk significantly of endometrial cancer.
In the 80s, I believe we were still trying to get people to pay attention to the fact that there was this field of study called women's health, that it didn't necessarily coincide with obstetrics or gynecology. For example, heart disease and cancer, breast cancer. In the 80s, the big issues that were controversial really centered around premenstrual syndrome. In the 90s, I believe we really saw much more of the membership beginning to focus on menopause. One of the big issues around menopause during my presidency was some of the concern about the newly started Women's Health Initiative. We've moved from thinking that hormone therapy could be a way of preventing 50% of heart disease in women to now realizing that it's more likely to increase the incidence of heart disease in women.
It was a time when Barbara Seaman was writing her books on oral contraceptive, the pill. It was in the 60s that Wilson really was promoting hormone estrogen replacement for women. I think at the first conference we had the real critical acclaim of the MDQ, the Menstrual Distress Questionnaire. PMS was a very, very hot item, and at the same time at the 79 conference, the 89 conference, we were following on the heels of McPherson and everybody else who was working in the menopause arena.
The whole issue of hormone, at that time hormone replacement therapy, came up. Not enough information was available to us to be able to say that this should be a public health measure. And that was our very strong and vocal opinion.
Well, we've talked already about PMDD and Seraphim, but also the Women's Health Initiative reports came out last summer, and then there have been follow-up reports in recent months showing that there are more risks and less benefits than we thought to using hormone therapy.
We have been one of the few voices in the wilderness calling for solid scientific trials, because it opens up again the whole question of what is the norm for aging for a woman as she moves from her reproductive years to her mature years.
How does the Society for Menstrual Cycle Research stand out from other research organizations?
It was one of the earliest really multidisciplinary women's health research organizations. We included not only people from the humanities, but also from advocacy organizations. The emphasis on mentorship, welcoming students, and trying to be supportive to their work.
The focus around the common topic of the menstrual cycle and its relationship to women's health in general. At the same time, the diversity of the academic disciplines that were represented, or the clinical fields that were represented here.
We haven't gotten a lot of competition from other organizations that have wanted to study the menstrual cycle. It's interesting that it's taken a feminist perspective to envision the study of the menstrual cycle and menstrual cycle research from this much larger viewpoint.
We're focused. I mean, we have never lost our focus, which is women's health. It's been a wonderful arena for and a jumping off place for young researchers. I remember Alice Rossi's comments the last time we were in Chicago about what a wonderful sisterhood, and I think that's exactly the word that she used, what a sisterhood we were.
I have not found any other group that has a sole focus on women's health and women's health related to the menstrual cycle. It doesn't stop at our conferences. We gain a lot of information sharing.
First of all, it is a feminist organization. It's interdisciplinary, which is one of the things I like the most about it. We just have a wonderful mix of people coming at the same issue from different perspectives, which makes it a lot of fun. We refer to ourselves as the society, as if there weren't any others. When you do something for this group, dozens of people thank you for it, no matter how small it is. It's really a place that I felt appreciated, and I've enjoyed working with the group.
What do you see as the future direction for the Society for Menstrual Cycle Research and for women's health research?
Women's health has changed a great deal in the last, say, 10 to 15 years. I think it took a tremendous constituency of women to make the point, for example, to the federal government. Once there was money for research on women's health, the nature of women's health, in a sense, changed a bit. We need to continue really standing up for women's interests.
I think that we're really well poised to influence work and thinking about menopause over the next several years. With the aging of the baby boomers, there's so many of us for whom that's a really central concern. I think the next step really needs to be a global view. That global view probably needs to focus not only on menopause, but more generally on women as we age, because that is going to be such a dramatic change for the population.
Clearly, the baby boom generation is going to push the interest to the postmenopause years. Sexuality right now is so hot. Viagra has changed sexual health in many ways, for the good and for the bad. With these kinds of technologies that we're capable of, and with the human genome and understanding the science and the new science, there will always be a need for standing back and looking at the social impact of these breakthrough technologies.
I would like us to be much more visible in mainstream media. We need to pick up again where we started back in 1977, but this time I think we need to be much more vocal, much more visible. My greatest fear is that if the findings of the estrogen arm of the Women's Health Initiative turn out to be positive for women, and remember, they've been researching women who had hysterectomies. I'm just going to let you think about that and answer the question.
We will simply grow in size, but maintain the same feminist roots.
I don't see the society going away anytime in the near future because there's so much work to do yet. I think we could be more active, we could do more for public education.
What changes in society over the past 25 years have most impacted women's health?
You know, I think that the women's movement in general has had a tremendous impact on women's lives.
I guess I think about the continuing changes that we see in how women live their everyday lives. My age cohort of the oldest of the baby boomers lived a very different life than my mother's birth cohort. I suspect that one of the reasons that we are paying as much attention to menopause as we are right now is that we have really upped the ante for women to be able to perform in the society in some very visible ways. We live now in an age in which women are doing everything and expected to do everything.
The big discoveries of the 20th century, the birth control pill is always listed as number 10 or 5 or something. But I think the whole notion of really controlling reproduction is really something that has had an amazing impact on women's lives. And our society actually hasn't done a lot in looking at the infertility technologies and third-party reproduction and the impact of egg donation on young women.
I would say it's the impact of the access to information. All you have to do is go to the internet and pull up anything on women's health or menopause or PMS or menstruation. But the negative thing that's happened is that it's served to confuse women. And I think it's the decision-making aspect that's probably one of the most troubling.
I think the biggest change to women's health has been the self-help movement and the focus of the feminist movement on consumerism, and that is women being participants in their health care and their own health promotion. I also think that a big change has been the movement from the woman as simply a reproductive agent to the woman who has an entire lifespan, and that's a brand new thing.
All the activism around breast cancer, I think, has been a major issue. And that's been good because it's attracted a lot of funding, and there's been a lot of education of women about the issue. But it's also been bad too because it's eclipsed other things like heart disease that need attention.
The Society for Menstrual Cycle Research produces a periodic newsletter and has a series of published volumes of interdisciplinary research related to the menstrual cycle. For more information, visit the Society's website at www.pop.psu.edu/SMCR.